On September 27th, Hurricane Helene ravaged western North Carolina, causing widespread destruction across the greater Asheville area. 5 local musicians banded together to raise money for aid, and the Caverns of Gold music compilation was born. 280 performers are featured on the compilation. Each episode of this podcast goes in depth with the artists that brought their gifts to this compilation to help Western Carolina. I'm your host, Kelly Minnis, and this is the Caverns of Gold podcast.
Back up a little more, nothing to see here. Life is more beautiful than this, though I'm a mess, dear. But when the sparrow looks down at me from her flight above, she sees diamonds in my tears, rubies in my blood.
Asheville Americana singer-songwriter Jenny Bradley is a singer's singer. Jenny performs all over Western Carolina as a solo artist and with many Asheville groups, including Moonwater, a duo with her teenage daughter Bluebell. Jenny has been very active on the Asheville music circuit for the past several years and hosts several open mics and residencies around town. I spoke to Jenny about her background as a music educator to the rich and famous in New York City and how COVID-19 aided her late blooming as a songwriter. Where I always start these interviews at is I ask folks what their very first memory of music is.
My very first memory of music is my grandmother playing music in her music room, and she still does that today. She has a music room in the same house I went to back in the 70s, and there's a Wurlitzer organ, like a 1964 Wurlitzer organ, and a Baldwin piano, and some mandolins and violins and things, and she can play all that. And I just remember her playing hymns and everybody in the family singing the hymns. And that's my first memory. And from there, we did that in church too, but I remember her living room very specifically.
And how did you go from singing along to actively participating in music?
Well, my grandma, I remember, had me sing a solo once at her church, and I did that. I remember being a little nervous about that, but I was maybe 3 years old when that happened. And then my mother put me in private piano lessons. And I just took to it really quickly and loved it and performed in all the talent shows at school and kept singing in church, either with a choir or in a play or solos every once in a while singing and playing the piano sometimes. And it was really very much church driven at the beginning, and then it turned into classical piano.
And at what point, when you were playing piano like this and playing in church, did it occur to you that you could do that outside of the church or outside of the house and play your own music?
Wildly, that didn't really, playing my own music only started within the last few years. Like, even though I'm 51, you'd think I would have been doing this a lot longer. It was mainly classical piano that I played outside of the church at school performances, or maybe a wedding here or there, or recitals. I studied classical piano, ended up getting a degree in music and music education with an emphasis in classical piano. So everything was classical piano for a long, long time.
What did you want to do with that?
Well, whenever I was in high school, I grew up in Pelzer, South Carolina. I didn't have big aspirations necessarily to be a songwriter. I had never written a song in high school. I was really just playing classical music mainly. And my chorus teacher, my band teacher, I was in the marching band, and also I was in the chorus at school, and I loved it. And I loved my teachers, and my teachers were so influential on me. I just saw them and thought, oh, I could do that. I could teach kids, and that's what I want to do. I made a decision my senior year to study music education and become either a band director or a choral teacher. And I ended up studying that in college. But once I got to college, I started learning more about music theory and applying it to more pop music. And I was like, oh, this music theory is showing me that I could write songs. I could craft my own music. And it was a very, very slow process. I did a little bit of it when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And then I ended up getting married and having kids. And it went on the back burner for, I'm talking like 30 years.
So during that time, were you playing music, playing covers in bars, or, were you playing in bands at all?
No, I mainly played music for my own enjoyment for a long, long time. I made a living as a piano teacher. I still do. I just left a piano lesson right now. And I've built my own business as a traveling piano school in New York City, in Chicago, and here now in Asheville. I was very focused on my career as a running a music school and teaching piano lessons and teaching other children to write songs. I did a lot of songwriting with young other children, teenagers, children, and teaching them how to write songs and never really tapping in to my own ability, really. Like, I'm serious. I was so focused on, I love what I did, but I had to make a living. I was raising 2 kids by myself at that point, and I really needed to make a living. I was living in New York City, and I just focused on that, and I loved it. I threw so many parties and recitals and events in New York with the children and their songs. Sometimes I would play my own classical music, but I never really got into songwriting until I moved to Western North Carolina. So this is my 5-year anniversary this week of living in Western North Carolina. So it's been exactly 5 years that I have been kind of focused on having a band.
That's fascinating to me because most musicians come at that at a 180-degree sort of way, where they begin to play music. They want to go out and play music in front of people. And then later, how do I make a living doing this? But you focused right away on making a living with music and then came back at it from the other side of it much later in life. You made music work for you in a different sort of way.
Yeah. I was raised in a very conservative home, very practical. My father wanted me in and out of college in 4 years and get a job with insurance. And I had that mindset early on. Like, I needed to have a steady job. I got married right out of college. I just had such a, I don't know, I didn't even think like pursue this as a passion or anything. I was more thinking like I need to make a living, but I love what I do. I love what I do making a living. And so I was very happy teaching children and making music in that way. And I still participated in church music. And whenever my ex-husband and we moved to Chicago, I started working at the Old Town School of Folk Music, and I wrote a music curriculum there. I very much consider myself a music educator. That's my first and foremost title in my mind, is that I'm a music educator. There's an art to teaching, and I feel that it's my calling. It's what I'm best at doing, is teaching music. And when I moved to Chicago, I was in my 5th year of teaching. I taught at the Old Town School of Folk Music, wrote a piano curriculum for that. It's a nonprofit school, a huge school. And it was so fulfilling. But there, they focused on folk music, which was really awesome. I still taught classical piano like I do now and always have. But they had a library where you could listen to albums and recordings of all these great folk musicians. And I started tapping into that. And that was a big influence on me in Chicago. And so from there, I moved, after living in Chicago about 5 years, I moved to New York City with my ex-husband. And there I started my own business teaching piano and going all over. And what happened there was, in the midst of all that, I got a divorce from my ex-husband. And this is before I had children. And I was left to make a living on my own. And I did it. And I tapped into kind of the celebrity community of New York City. And at the time, I was teaching Jerry Seinfeld's children, Madonna's children, George Stephanopoulos' children, a lot of famous folks that had a ton of money. And that enabled me to run this business and make a good living in Manhattan. And then I could reserve a couple spots for children that couldn't afford piano lessons. And I had this great group of kids that I was teaching, and we'd all get together, jam together, write music together. But it was never about me. It was never about my music. It was all about them. And they wrote their own music with my assistance. And through all those years of doing this is my 30th year of teaching. I've learned a lot about songwriting. Like I didn't really write, I wrote some songs in my late 20s. I love country music too. And I did that for a little bit of time, but I put it on the back burner. And then when COVID hit, I was living in New York with my two kids, and I moved to North Carolina. And I then started writing songs because I wasn't teaching so much. Time stopped and we weren't working as normal. And I just started writing songs. My daughter and I were doing it together. We were singing. My son was playing percussion. And we had this major life change in so many ways. Not only did we move from Manhattan to Franklin, North Carolina, but we started doing things differently. We focused on art, and we focused on singing and harmony. And it was just such a beautiful awakening for us. And it changed our lives completely. And that's the direction I've gone since then has been, we formed a band. I've been in other bands, I've written a lot of songs. I've made an album. All of that has happened only in 5 years, from the time I was 46 to right now.
I've met a lot of musicians who, for the most part, I think it's assumed that, a musician starts when they're a teenager or sometimes earlier in life. And I have met a lot of folks who started much later in life, either because family or friends or someone in their life either told them, well, you can't do that, or
Yeah.
that's not a great idea for you to do. And I think a lot of folks, or they were in school, I wanted to go to school and play drums in middle school, but they handed me a flute and that wasn't any fun, so I stopped doing it. So
Right.
I find it interesting when I meet folks, in your case, you already had all of the skills in place for you to make that switch from being someone focused on other people's music to being focused on your own music and your own ability to write and create it. And as someone who did that much later in their musical career, is
Mm-hmm.
there anything that you feel, do you have more of a clarity of emotion when you write, or a clarity of where you're going with it because you have all this confidence and all this skill from doing this for 30, 40 some odd years before you came to being a songwriter? I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering if there's any sort of perspective, a unique perspective that coming to it the way that you did might have given you as a songwriter or as a musician.
I consider myself a young songwriter in a way, not a young musician. I feel confident in my knowledge of music, you know. But songwriting is relatively new for me. So, my first effort in the first album, and I'm about to record a new album with my daughter, but the first effort was very young songwriting, honestly. But the truth is that it came from the heart. It was something that was so real that we experienced. We basically delivered an album that was about our experience moving from New York to Franklin, North Carolina, and having this experience. And when I listen to it now, our voices sound different. And that was just 5 years ago. Of course, my daughter was only 10 and 11 at the time when we recorded it. Now she's 15. But even my voice has developed because I didn't sing in microphones that often. I've learned now to sing in microphones, like being a classical piano player all those years and a piano teacher. I honestly didn't sing in microphones that often, sometimes at church, but often at church without a microphone. And singing in a microphone is a whole different ball game too when it comes to recording. And then singing and songwriting, I'm learning every day and getting better. And I'm influenced by so many people, not just famous people we listen to, but local musicians in town in Asheville. I find it so fascinating. I love going to songwriters in the round and listening to different songwriters like Amanda M. Platt. I'm so inspired by listening to other songwriters. And we are going to record an album soon, and we've written a lot of songs that we've not even performed out at all. But I'm going to take some time and analyze them and see what I want to put on the album. But it's going to be way different than the first one because we've kind of developed a sound over these last 5 years, my daughter and I.
So you've gone from playing music and teaching music to everyone else's children. What's different about playing music and teaching music to your own?
It's really hard. Teaching music to your own children is just, woo, pretty hard. I mean, I don't consider myself their teacher. They have their own teachers. I can't teach my own children. It's the relationship is too, you know, my own students don't feel like they can tell me. It's hard to explain, it's like my kids just seem like they don't want me to be teaching them. When they have their own teacher, it just works better. So they've learned to play their instruments with other teachers, not with me. I might review things with them, but what we do together is rehearse, jam, throw out ideas about songs, things like that. But I never consider it a lesson with my kids. So I've never really been their teacher. They've had guitar teachers, piano teachers, drum teachers, all different teachers, but I was never really their teacher.
So, how did you guys get from Franklin over here and get integrated into the Asheville music scene?
Well, I arrived in Franklin because that's where my grandma, the one that has the Wurlitzer organ and Baldwin piano in her room, she's 95 now and she still plays piano in church. She's a very important person in my life, my biggest influence. And her name is Gladys Higginbotham. Just a genius musician. And she was born and raised in Franklin, North Carolina. And the family still has property there where she was born. The house she was born is still there. But the family built a little cabin up on the hill from where my grandma was born. And it kind of serves as a vacation house. And whenever COVID hit, my mother suggested that the kids and I stay there just for the short term while COVID was happening. We didn't realize that we would be there a year and a half in that cabin. We thought we might be there a month in that cabin. We anticipated going back to New York, but it didn't happen because of COVID. And so while I was there, I started going into Asheville sometimes, listening to music. And the first person I met in Asheville was David Earl Tomlinson. And he and I started singing together. And I started wanting to write songs because we were singing his songs. And I was just like, wow, I loved his songs. I love his songwriting and how he goes about doing it. And I started writing songs on my own, mainly from the influence of his songs initially. And then I started branching out and listening to other people in town, like Taylor Martin was the second one, Ashley Heath. I could go on and on. Amanda M. Platt, I mentioned her earlier. These were folks I was listening to on live streams and then going into Asheville about an hour away and catching their shows once the world started opening up a little bit. And it started out by, I'd put like a virtual tip in a tip jar for one of their live streams, and I might send a message and say, hey, I love your song, something like that. And then the kids and I moved to Asheville. We moved to West Asheville, right on Haywood, and they wanted to live in an apartment, kind of like in New York. So we lived right above the Dolly Parton mural in West Asheville. And it did. It felt kind of like Williamsburg, Brooklyn over there. And we loved it. And I started going out to open mics. And I was singing with David a little bit, harmonizing his songs and getting out a little bit here and there, singing some music. And then my daughter and I started hitting the open mics, and we hit Taylor Martin's open mic, and we started going there every week and kind of getting used to singing together in microphones and in front of people and kind of shaping it. And meanwhile, we had been recording our album at Citizen Vinyl Studios with Gar Ragland, and we had that experience doing that too, but we weren't really performing yet until we started doing the open mics. And from there, I just started meeting people. Ashley and I became great friends. Matt Smith was on my album, and he's a phenomenal musician, and he played on the album, and then we played with him. He played with Moonwater some, and from there, I just met so many people. We played his show out at Highland called Here, Here. It's called Here, Here Now. It used to be called Crafted Songwriter Series. And I just met all the bookers and all the people, and next thing I know, we're playing gigs all the time. And I called ISIS Music Hall and asked them if we could do our album release there. And it was right before ISIS closed down. And he was like, sure, let's do it. And we promoted it. And we had a wonderful show there with all my family and friends. And it was just like a full circle from moving from New York, making that album at Citizen Studios, and then releasing it. It was just such an emotional night, really. And what a beautiful time we had that evening. Wow, I'm telling you, with my kids on stage, I cried just because both my kids were on stage with me, and we had a wonderful band that night. Nina Singh on drums. We had James Schlender on fiddle, Ryan Kajenko on bass, and Matt Smith on pedal steel. And my daughter, of course, Bluebell. My son Bud sat in with us a few songs, and we just did our music that night and told our story from the heart. It was awesome. And from there, we got some articles in magazines and different things. I think because our story was interesting as a family band, but that's what happened. And now we play pretty regularly around town. I also still teach piano full time. So,
Tell me what your hurricane experience was like.
we live in North Asheville now. We don't live in West Asheville anymore. I woke up with trees everywhere and cars slammed, and we slept hard through it. I didn't really realize how bad it was going to be, and woke up and it was kind of like the apocalypse out there, and people were kind of walking around, getting in their cars, trying to listen to the radio to figure out what was going on. I drove after a while, once we kind of figured things out with neighbors and everything. I drove to the River Arts District to see what was going on. I checked on David over there. That's where he lives, and I had no way to get in touch with him. And he had already gone to his daughter's, and I said, I'm just going to go ahead and drive on down and look at the river. And I did, and it was the craziest thing I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, I was looking over at the guitar bar, and it was just, that building where the guitar bar was completely, I mean, deep in water, 20 something feet, it looked like. And the flood was so, I don't know, intense. And the first few nights we stayed in Asheville, and the neighbors, and we all sang some songs together and everything. And it was my daughter's 15th birthday, and my dad met us out in South Carolina with some gas because I was running out of gas and couldn't get gas anywhere. And we went and spent a few days with my grandma too, and I always sing with my grandma. We play organ piano duets and make music. My kids sing with her, my parents, and it's just a really special bond we have. But we went there for a few days, and then David had this idea to make these dry toilets for people that couldn't carry heavy water to flush their toilets. And so people in my hometown came together and brought all this material that I took back to him, to his metal shop. And we put music on hold for, a few weeks, and just created a little factory in his metal shop and made these toilets. We also practiced and sang as well in between making the toilets, but it was a really wild experience, but a humbling one too. Many volunteers were involved, and it was a huge undertaking. And we got, a couple hundred toilets out to people in need. And it was just, like I said, a humbling experience. And music was important during that time, but, we weren't performing. I remember the first time we did perform after the flood was one of my curated shows that I do at the River Arts District Brewing Company. I had some folks on that gig, and there was such a sense of camaraderie. There was such a sense of community that night at my show. A lot of people came out. It felt like they needed music. The community needed music. We had put music on hold to make those toilets for so long, but we also needed to be making music because it's good for people. It's good for people to heal. It's what people need, really. And that's what we did. A couple of nights before the flood, exactly 2 nights before the flood, it was pouring rain, and we had a little break from the rain, and I put on this big Bruce Springsteen tribute show for Bruce Springsteen's birthday. And little did we know, in 2 days, our whole community was going to be changed and shifted. But, music was on hold for a good month, it felt like.
Diamonds and Rubies is a song that you donated to Caverns of Gold.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about this song?
Yes. Diamonds and Rubies is based on a Buddhist saying that when the bird flies over you, she can't see your pain. She doesn't know that you're crying, but what she sees is the beauty below her. So she sees in your tears the diamonds, and in your blood the rubies. So it comes from a Buddhist saying, a friend in New York had told me about. And I thought about it because, I had, before we moved to North Carolina, I went through a whole bout of breast cancer and went through all that goes with that, having cancer. And when I wrote this song, that's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about surviving, I guess, or making the best out of a bad situation, or keeping a good attitude. The song is really about that. It's like when it was really happening, like the song says, back up a little more, nothing to see here. That's kind of like saying, I don't want you to see me cry. I don't want you to see me hurting. I'm going to get through this kind of thing. I talk very specifically in the song about the bird, the sparrow, and what she sees in me. And that's what the song's about. It's about making the best of a terrible situation. And that's why I chose it for Caverns of Gold.
So what have you got coming up in the next little bit?
I have a lot going on. I have 4 residencies right now. I run my open mic at the River Arts District Brewing Company on every second Tuesday. And every fourth Tuesday, I have a curated show. It's called Curated Fourth Tuesdays, where I invite 4 artists to sing their originals or some fresh covers that they've arranged. And I invite the community out. And it's been a great success. We've had wonderful musicians. Some of the best musicians in town have played this curated show, and I'm super proud of it. I moved my company from New York City to Asheville too, the Americana Music Circle. It used to be called the Americana Music Circle NYC, and now it's called the Americana Music Circle AVL. And what we do is we teach piano lessons and guitar lessons, ukulele lessons, anything out, and we drive to people's homes and make house calls. And also, like I did in New York, I curated little shows. In New York, it was more house parties, birthday parties, things like that. And here, I want to start, now that I'm involved in the music scene, curating more shows like I do at the River Arts District Brewing Company. So I'm doing that. It's kind of like, in a way, like open folk, except for I announce who's singing. And it's not as many musicians, but it's similar in that I'm bringing out songwriters to sing in an intimate setting and in a listening setting. And now I'm starting some residencies at Terra Nova. I'm doing first Wednesdays, a jazz show. And my band Hot House Holler is going to kick that off on the first Wednesday of April. That's with Drew Matalich and Zach Page is too going to be our bass player. And then on Thursdays now at Terra Nova, I'm hosting a pub sing where I invite one guest to join me. Sal Landers will be my first guest, and I'm going to have Ashley Heath and David Earl another time. And basically the first set will be their original music, but the second set, we're going to have words up on the wall, and everybody's just going to sing along. And like I was telling you earlier with the hurricane, singing is so healing for people. And I feel like having a communal sing is going to be a lot of fun, but also healing.
How can folks find you and your music online?
I mainly do it through Facebook and Instagram. You can find me Jenny Bradley on Facebook. Most everything is on there, Jenny Bradley. And also Moonwater Duo. That's my daughter. Moonwater Duo, 2 different words. And then on Instagram, Moonwater Duo as well. And on Instagram, I'm also Jen Bluebud for my private page, and people can follow me there. I promote everything there. I don't have a website right now, but I'm realizing now that I'm doing this interview, I should probably make one. But I advertise everything online, and I've been also putting it in the Mountain Express and on WNCW and trying to promote things that way and testing out a few different ways to get the word out. After we're going to record our next album called Carolina Dreaming next month. And on May 25th, we're going to release the first single, Carolina Dreaming. And that night that afternoon, we're having a matinee show at the White Horse in Black Mountain, full band, Moonwater full band. And it's really to celebrate the release of our song, Carolina Dreaming, which was written for us by our friend Brian Stearns in New York City. He thought it would be perfect for Moonwater, and we're so honored to sing it.
Folks in the Asheville area have lots of opportunities to see Jenny and Moonwater perform live between her various open mic nights, residencies, and curated performances. You can follow Moonwater on Facebook and Instagram. Caverns of Gold is hosted and produced by Kelly Minnis, and he wrote and performed the theme music. Caverns of Gold can be found on Facebook and Instagram, as well as at cavernsofgold.bandcamp.com. Thank you for listening.